Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting.
Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Broughton. Today we have back with us a regular guest, Pastor David Ramirez. Welcome back, Ramirez.
Good to be on.
It's good to have you back. So you gave a presentation out on Wyoming last year this time, wasn't it? Or real close?
Yeah, it was. It was actually right before Super Bowl weekend. So, yeah, a little bit over a year ago. It was the Telling the Good News conference in Wyoming, which is a great conference. Yeah.
And your topic was saving the sons of Missouri, correct?
Correct.
And it goes into kind of like the generational divide, which in some ways has always been around, right? Where the younger are pitted against the older and the older against the younger, kind of seen in like Footloose or something like that. But it seems to me like it has grown larger, that chasm that is between, say, the boomer generation and the millennials and younger, particularly the Gen Z. And I don't always understand it. Because sometimes, I have disagreements with my parents and in-laws and other members of the congregation who are from the boomer generation. And there are some times where I'm like, oh yeah, I can see where you're coming from. And then other times I'm like, yeah, I think you're missing these pieces. And to be fair, they don't always understand where I'm coming from. And then I can talk to the younger generation and I can kind of see where they're coming from. And yet there's almost a malaise or a burn it all down kind of attitude instead of, yeah, we've been handed, a crap sandwich, but that doesn't alleviate us from responsibility. And so I'm just trying to understand what's going on. And is it just because, like, as you would remind me, I'm old and
partly,
and I'm just not clued in, or is there more going on that could help me understand a bit better where all of this is coming from? Because it seems like the division between the older generations and the younger generations isn't like that of Footloose merely. It seems like it's bigger and more difficult to overcome.
Yeah, so I think you've dated yourself by invoking Footloose, just to let you know.
Yeah.
I too watched that movie a long time ago and didn't particularly enjoy it. But I think the question is a very good one that we gotta address right away. If I could just rephrase it or clarify it, point number one that you made was there's always generational divides just built into nature itself, because people born at different times are going to have different experiences, different, therefore, perspectives, and have different outlooks on life. But your second point was that it seems bigger than normal, and I would totally agree. And so while there's always kind of a natural difference of perspective between generations, I think that this has been really, I can't think of the proper English word, but it's really been it's really bigger right now because of the rise of mass media.
So it's more intensified because of that.
Yeah, that's the word I was thinking of. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's intensified. If you think about normal, most of human history, agrarian society or nomadic society for that matter, regional identities and tribal and familial identities were much more important than generational identities. But with the kind of the smushing down of, and now I'm just speaking about American identities, but it's true worldwide too. We've seen kind of this flattening out of regional and cultural identities, and an intensification of generational identities, because families and cultures have really shifted from a more intense focus on handing down what was before to being up with the current things.
So when you say intensification, you mean a real intensification, not just a perceived intensification because of mass media.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think the generational divide is far greater right now, even though I would submit that it is on the decline.
Okay.
And I think that explaining that would help, because if you go back 100 years, so back into the 1920s, a much more important, I mean, all of these things were part of the pie at all times and all places, whether it be regional or cultural or generational identities. But in 1920, and certainly even more so in 1820, in America, regional identities were far more important and far more central to the average person in America. So in 1820 or 1920, it was far more important whether you were a Southerner or a Northeasterner or someone from out west, and there's obviously subcategories there, or a Midwesterner, versus the percentage of the importance that your actual generation in time played as a role in your identity. Now it is much more important. So just to throw out fake numbers, and they are just fake, if being a Southerner was, let's say, 50% of your, made up 50% of your core identity in 1820 or 1920, and your generational identity as your core identity was only maybe a mere 25%. And obviously there's other identities there, whether religious or cultural or familial, whatever. Now I think it's very different. And I think you can see this. I don't think social media has created this, but it does expose it. And so how many Facebook groups are, Boomer memories or Gen X memories, or I was born in the 1980s and don't you remember this? And of course, musical choices. The person born in 1820 probably listened to their local heritage music, for that matter, far more than anything that was unique to his generation in terms of percentage. But now with the rise of mass media and the flattening down of those regional, cultural, and religious distinctives, your core identity is now made up a lot more by what generation you were born into. And so I think that's why we see an intensification of generational, not just conflict, but identity and identification with a particular generation. Now, on the flip side, I think that that's waning, because in America, at least, you have lots of polarization, religiously, culturally, and politically, and so I do think that with the boomers, it probably reached its height, and I think it is lessening. Just take music as a wonderful example. You have the top 40, top 40 songs. Pretty much every boomer who was a teenager knew what the top 40 songs were familiar. I'm not saying they liked all of it, but they were familiar with it. It was a shared experience. By the time that you and I were teenagers, there was a growing fragmentation in terms of different styles of music. And did you know the top 40? Now, I think it was still pretty true for us that most teenagers knew the top 40 songs in a given year. But it lessened. And the cohesion and the unity of the culture, which I would say reached its height while the boomers were coming of age, was lessened by the time we came around, and even more so as now you have people who are into hardcore metal who don't even know what the rap songs are, who don't even know what the top songs are for country and western or whatever genre of music that you want to discuss. That's just anecdotal, but I think it's paradigmatic of a broader thing. And so I think we're on the slide down to not so much regional identities, but ideological identities. And I don't mean that in a negative connotation, but if you were to take, for instance, someone from our generation even, who, you take one person who was homeschooled, even though that was very rare at the time, someone who went to a Lutheran parochial school and someone who went to a public school, and you put them in the same room and they were from our generation, well, I bet most of them, or all three of them, would know about and be aware of most of the top 40 hits. And that's not true today. I don't think most homeschooling kids are going to be aware of the same things that the public school kids are. Maybe you could say that there's still more of an overlap with parochial and public schools, but I would even say it really depends on what type of public school. Are you in a liberal district? Are you in a more conservative district? Is your family religious? So I think that the fragmentation is very, very easily observable, and that's why generational identity is on the wane. But it still is incredibly important because we did go through that big mass media and a common pop or popular American culture, and that in turn leads why these conflicts are so great, because our culture has not done a good job of passing on the basics. Whether those basics are good or bad, I think we're at a point where there's a great dearth or lack of overlapping shared outlooks. And when you have vastly different perspectives, certainly that might be advantageous if you want to learn more about someone else. Sometimes different perspectives can be very helpful, but it's also ripe for misunderstanding and totally different evaluations of what you're looking at, which makes it ripe for conflict.
So you mentioned that social media didn't create it, but exposed it. And then you were talking about how there are these different perspectives. So what did create it? And what are the perspectives that are actually perhaps being handed down, not from generation to generation, but that each generation has that are divergent?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, I think I did already answer it in the sense of, I think mass media, in the mid-century, mid-20th century did create this because you have mass media, but you don't have the explosion of alternative media.
Gotcha.
And so think about our parents. They grew up with, 4 channels and maybe a few local channels. But it was during our lifetime when you have the explosion of cable and then even later the explosion of the internet. So people can get siloed into these different things and not the whole generation experience all the same mass media, even though, of course, they still experience the same history to one extent or the other. So I think it's not just the rise of mass media, but it's mass media that's rather narrow as compared to today.
Okay.
Because social media, there's a million different sites, and there's all these different little subgroups, and you can go and have a community of sorts, off and away from everybody else. Whereas, again, with the boomers, you're watching the same few channels. You're listening to a very limited amount of radio stations as compared to today. So I think that explains it. I don't remember the second part of the question. I'm sorry.
The different perspectives, in some way, what has caused those different perspectives? If it's not being handed down like the shared experience, then it's their individual experiences that are shaping those perspectives. So what are those things?
Well, yeah, and I think that's where generational identity is always going to play a factor because, number one, you have the input of history, what you actually experience. So that's always going to be a factor. But then also you have what media and what news, what analysis that you're actually consuming. So that's what's shaping our perspectives. And that's another, catalyst for a lot of this conflict, I think. Because as, a famous meme says, the world that you grew up in no longer exists. Mm-hmm. Or the world you were born into no longer exists. And that's very true. And because if you accept my claim that generational differences are greater now than if you look at the big sweep of human history, that they are intensified right now, then when you have different perspectives and difference in experience, because frankly, American history has really been a wild ride since the 60s. You could say even previous, but we're dealing with current generations. But, a vast difference in experience is going to naturally lead to different outlooks and perspectives, even as we kind of draw it down closer to the Missouri Synod, even among those who hold the same faith. And so besides just kind of the worldly threats that are always constantly surrounding the church, generational conflict, I would say, and generational estrangement really can impede the establishment and the passing down of the faith to younger generations. So,
So do you think that the older generation doesn't think that their world doesn't exist now? Or do you think, kind of like how you hear even within like sectors of the clergy, it was so much worse back then.
Yeah.
And now it's better. And then the younger guys are saying, yeah, but it could be we could do more. Is that the kind of thing that's happening? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that one of the things that plays into this is just natural, where even if you are the most reflective person, even if you are the most open to listening to older generations and younger generations and really trying to understand them, you're also fighting against something that's just common among all people. Mm. And that is that it's impossible for you to actually experience what someone else has experienced. Mm-hmm. You can only go so far in terms of listening and experiencing, by way of testimony of what happened before. And, this is a hobby horse of mine, but that's why history is so important.
Yeah. And
getting a broader perspective. But even if you are sensitive to that, the fact of the matter is that all of us, not just you, but all of us, in some ways, our formative years crystallize a picture of, the world that we live in. And it's hard for us to forget that world is no longer here. Mm. So, I came of age, as they say, into young adulthood, those very formative years in the 90s. You were what, the late 70s? Is that correct? No, I'm joking.
I was born in the late 70s.
Okay. Fair enough. So, what year did you graduate high school?
95.
Yeah, I graduated in 99. So there's only a 4-year difference. We would have overlapped in high school for 1 year. And that is always going to shape you. The old saw about everybody is still who they were in high school, even when they're 70 or 80. Obviously, that's not absolutely true, but there is a general, wisdom to that because you get shaped in a certain way. So yes, can you still be shaped and grow and overcome things? Yeah, but a lot of things crystallize during those, junior high and high school years. And that is kind of, I would say, our default position. Obviously the world is very different than the mid to late 90s. And we're aware of that. We're not totally ignorant of it. But if you're not thinking too hard, I would submit that you or I would sometimes, without thinking, kind of default to, the world is like this. And so our norms, our default outlook on the world is when we kind of woke up more to the bigger culture, the bigger world, bigger questions. And so that's something that we've got to be aware of.
Well, that came, that's something that I think I wrestled with during 2020, because my assumption was a particular thing, but what I was seeing was vastly different, and had to kind of come to grips with that. It's not the way I'm assuming.
Yeah. And recalibrations are important, but they're hard. And I guess what I'm pushing even further about is the first step of recalibration is to know what your baseline is. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you go to the shooting range and you're always shooting, to the right or up or whatever. You need to know what your norm is before you try to correct it. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot of self-reflection. And recalibrations can happen. And it's not like we haven't experienced history between 1995 or 9 and 2026. Mm-hmm. But it can be hard, painful, and annoying to do this. But frankly, I think that this is the reason why we should care about generational trends and studies and conflict, because as every, DP who preaches at Call Day says, you should get to know your people as a pastor. You should love them. You should meet them where they're at. And as cliche as sometimes that comes across, let's be honest, there's a lot of truth in that. And if that's true for a DP saying it to a pastor, that's also true of just Christians hearing that and wanting to love their neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think this is just like a futile, side sociological project, but it is part and parcel of our task as Christians and especially pastors to know your people, know the people around you, actually love them enough to know where they're coming from, know where they're at, so that you can, whether it be as a shepherd of a flock or as a Christian who wants to serve and love his neighbors, to help people actually care enough about each other to understand each other's perspectives and keep good bonds or forge new good bonds between generations. Because let's just be honest, neither one of us are in doubt that generational conflict is real and it's a problem. And it does not help in the passing down of the faith and the growth of the church.
Right. So what is the lay of the land then? Where do we stand in this conflict?
Yeah. So I probably should have made this caveat before, but before we get into the lay of the land, I would just say that obviously I've already engaged in a lot of generalizations and trends. And for all the people out there, you know who you are, to put it bluntly. If you're going to If you want to play the game of, well, not all boomers are like this and not all Zoomers are like that and whatnot, yeah, I know. I'm aware. That's why these are general trends, and anecdotal evidence to the contrary doesn't change the big picture. So we're going to be throwing out a lot of generalizations today, I would assume. So if you can't handle that, you probably should turn off the radio program right now. See, I dated myself, radio program, right? So yeah, with that caveat, I think that, the differences of perspectives really, generationally really are important, because, there are real gripes between the generations, and there always have been and there always will be, but they do seem especially problematic right now. And why Christians should care about this and why pastors should care about is that I'm worried that these arguments between the generations are actually declining. Now, that may sound strange to some people, but I know that it's probably true for you and any other pastor, that by way of analogy, if a couple came to you and said, Pastor, we're having lots of struggles and we're not getting along, or we're fighting, or we have all these arguments and we want to meet with you. Well, first of all, you're ecstatic that they actually want to meet with you and they want to talk to you about it. But if they come in and they're yelling and screaming at each other and it's very heated, I don't know about you, but I assume you would agree. I'm actually glad about that. I'm happy. And the reason is because they're still invested. People who are angry with each other are still invested in the relationship. They actually care about what the other person thinks. If two people walk in, a husband and a wife, and they're not just stonewalling each other, seething, but they're just nonchalant. They've moved past anger, and now they're starting to become apathetic, and they don't care. They don't even care about each other enough to actually get angry. That's when the danger really comes in for a breakup of a marriage or divorce or, other problems. And so that's why I say it seems to me, at least, that if you look online or if you've got your eyes and ears open around yourself, that generational kidding around and making fun of each other seems lessened to me as opposed to 5 or 10 years ago. I don't know if that's your experience.
Yeah, I mean, and on the whole and for the most part.
Okay. Yeah, I see that as a bad sign. Now, some of it might just be because the boomers are getting older, and they're starting to pass away from the scene. So that might be just a natural development. But I also think it's because the generations are not listening or yelling at each other as much as they used to be, which I see as not a good sign. So in terms of the different perspectives, I think that you've got huge amounts of not actually appreciating the differences of perspectives. And I'll be blunt, I do think that most of this is on the fault of the boomers. And I say that not because the millennials or the Zoomers are somehow more intrinsically holy or righteous or wise, but rather because it's just part of nature. When you're a younger generation, you are the subordinate, you are the inferior. You listen more and you hear your grandparents and your parents and older aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, whoever, talk more about their perspective. So it's just built into nature that the younger generations, whether they believe it or not, whether they buy it or not, whether they respect it or not, is besides the point. They do indeed hear the perspective of older generations more. And so I do think that there is a problem with older generations just by nature, not understanding a difference in perspective. And I do think that I know that you said we might do a couple episodes. I just want to be honest. This first episode is going to be from my wanting to present something is more aimed at the boomers. This part of the part of it anyway, because older generations are at a handicap just by nature to understand the perspectives of those who are younger, and I do believe that the younger generations have very real gripes, and we'll get into that later. I know as we look at the different perspectives in detail, but I mean, you look at just very briefly at the destruction of marriage over the last 60 or 75 years. You look at the difference in schooling. I mean, especially when it comes to saving the sons of Missouri. All of those young sons of the Missouri Synod were put into schools that by and large were designed not for them, but for girls. And so whether it be the solution being let's drug them up because they're acting like boys, or whether their aggression and natural competition has been pathologized, that has not been a good thing, and the gripes are real. Or the economic inheritance of America has not been passed down very faithfully at all. Or whether you just talk about the religious scene, moving from a culture that the boomers, and even I would say us in our younger years as Gen Xers, grew up in, a generally positive, situation over and towards Christianity, to moving to a neutral and even a negative evaluation of the faith. And so I do think the younger generations are not understood near as much as they should, and they do have real gripes. And unfortunately, among some, so I don't want to overgeneralize, but among some or even many of the older generations, not just boomers, but sometimes a lot of Gen X folks too, the reaction has been to either, at worst, punch them in the face and just tell them to pick themselves up by their bootstraps in a situation that is radically different than that which the previous generations experienced, or just dismissing it and not having the care or the love in great enough amount to actually listen and to be interested in why these gripes are there. Now, whether you're going to agree with all the gripes or not, whether you still might critique younger generations, that's all well and good. But to not care enough to listen, and listen long enough and hard enough to understand, that really is, I think, a general problem. So I would just say they can't be punched in the face over this. And by way of example, I think that, the sons of Missouri, generally speaking, if you grow up in a Missouri Synod church and you're a young man of under, let's say, 30, typically, in terms of the numbers, you are a Midwestern, maybe from other parts of the country, but generally speaking, Midwestern, white, and rather politically and religiously conservative. And if you take the approach of a lot of people in the Synod to people not like that, they usually are handled with kids' gloves. So to use an example, if you have a young lady, all the same stuff, but the only difference is that she's a girl, and she goes off to college and gets, pumped full of feminism and antagonism towards the evil patriarchy of the Bible. I'm pretty sure that 99.999% of Missouri Synod pastors and people would very swiftly be very kind and seek to treat her with kid gloves, maybe even many times too much with kid gloves, and try to understand her perspective and try to show her what the Bible actually teaches. If she showed up, on summer break and said something like, I just don't see why we don't ordain women. And I think a lot of people would be like, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. Here's what the Bible says. Let's work with her. Let's deal with her. If somehow this became a conversation between the pastor and the parents, or the pastor and the elders, or something like that, she had a coexist sticker on the back of her car or something, I don't think the reaction would be, we need to excommunicate you tomorrow. I don't think that she would be yelled at. Mm-hmm. I think that she would be treated gently and be tried to, listen to the Word of God. So that's just one example. We could use countless other examples. And yet, unfortunately, in our church body, many times you do have these conservative young guys who are angry about many legitimate gripes. And they express those. Maybe they're not always right in how they express it or what they believe. But I do think, unfortunately, many times it's, you need to be punched in the face, and you have gone against something that is so holy that you are a blasphemer and a heretic, and you need to be dealt with very severely and harshly. Not only is that showing a great inequality of how you approach those two situations, but also why? Why is that happening? And I would suspect, and I would claim, that it is because those young conservative guys are bucking what is dominant in our culture. And so I don't think we're doing it out of zeal for the truth of the Lord. I think that that tendency actually betrays fear of the culture, or actually belief in some cultural norms that aren't Christian norms. So I think that that's one of the main things that older generations need to appreciate. These guys have real gripes, and the reaction should not be punching them in the face. But even if there's lots of people who aren't very, very antagonistic to the Sons of Missouri, I also think that another pitfall is not caring enough. And that's something that really is sad. We should, as parents or grandparents or pastors or a church family, care enough to actually hear people out. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything that they say or feel or think, but we should care enough to listen. If you go further down on the spectrum towards, actually a positive reaction, I think that a lot of people are also sympathetic, but they're incompetent to help. I think that especially when young guys bring concerns about, I can't find a good Christian girl to marry, many times the advice is frankly laughable. Just be a better servant leader. White knight harder, as if that's going to help in today's world. So I'm glad some people are sympathetic. I'm glad that they have taken the time to listen, but we need to move from incompetency to actually being competent to help. And that does definitely mean listening to that perspective and actually recalibrating what has changed from when we were born or growing up or getting married or being in the church as a child to what the situation is now. One last thing in terms of kind of these general trends, I really think a thing that is harmful is when people are unreflective about other people's perspectives. I know I sound kind of like a all things are about perspectives, but perspectives are important, especially if you want to reach out and love that person. You need to know what part of their mental furniture is correct and how to help them, move forward in life, or where their mental furniture is misplaced and needs correction. And unfortunately, I do think that a trait of the boomer generation, and I hope you boomers don't take this too hard, but I think it's an important truth, is that I do believe the boomer generation is very unreflective as a whole. And what I mean by that is that they have been the center of so much attention as a very big generation as compared to the generations around them, that they have been the center of attention for so long and for basically the entire existence of their generation and of their lives individually, that they, more so than other generations, have a problem with actually being reflective about themselves, about the uniqueness of their generation, and how other generations have experienced the church, the state, and family life. You can see this in the phrase. The most common boomer slur is when somebody is listening to a boomer and then says, "Okay, boomer." Well, what does that convey? You're out of touch. You don't know what you're talking about. Things have totally changed, and you don't get it. Mm-hmm. Now, is that always fair? No. Is it always true? No. But I do think that there is a reason why that is the very popular retort to when a boomer wants to express his or her opinion. And that is the major critique, I think, generally speaking, on the boomers, that they are unreflective. And I do think that that's because of their history as a generation. So it's not all their fault, but we pastors and we Christians are always encouraging people to actually be reflective and be reflective of where you can improve, what you've done wrong. And so I do think that that is a major part of looking at generations, is to help older generations be more reflective.
So what are the major differences of these different perspectives versus the older and the younger? You mentioned kind of just generally in, like, say, the church, but what are the maybe you'd call it watershed events, or the major things that have played into these different perspectives?
Yeah. So let's take the church first. Aaron Wren, who's a religious commentator, had a really great schema of positive world, neutral world, negative world, and we've moved through that evolution or devolution in America. He sets the dates. Your mileage may vary from place to place and experience to experience. From up until about 1994. General American society was favorably postured towards Christianity. And then from about 1994 to 2014, we passed through a brief, roughly 20-year period of a neutral phase where Christianity perhaps did not have the positive acceptance, generally speaking, of the society at large, but you didn't have a dominant antagonism against it. But now, with the Great Awakening and post 2014, now we really are in kind of a negative world where the general culture is antagonistic and holds a negative opinion to the Christian faith. And I think that anybody over 40 would probably not only agree with this general schema, but also we've experienced it. I don't know. Is that true for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like I said, there are times when I can see where the older generation is coming from, but don't feel like they are quite understanding of where I'm coming from, and vice versa for the younger generation. Like, I get some of that, and sometimes I think they're overreacting to what they hear from above. Yeah,
I think that's true, and I think a lot of that's part of their perspective. So let's just take 3 snapshots. Not just with religion, but I would further it later into civil society and economic situations and home life. Let's just take snapshots of what you were born into and what you experienced in your tender years, and when you kind of came of age. So let's take a snapshot at 1960, 1980, and 2020. Nice round numbers. So if you are a Lutheran in America, Missouri Synod in particular, and you were born in 1960, Lutherans were about 4.5% of the American population. And there were, 2.4 million Missouri Synod Lutherans. Also, and this is very important, the Synod was still growing numerically, and would continue to grow into the early 1970s. And you've heard it, I've heard it, we've all heard it. And for any of the boomers listening, you've probably said it. You remember all those big confirmation classes, big VBS numbers. Many times people will call them the good old days. And not only can you remember it, you've got the pictures to prove it. And on many of our church walls, you've got those big, fat confirmation classes around pictures. Also, in terms of your congregational life, all of you were raised with the same hymnal across the board, TLH. Everybody had the TLH in their pews. You can probably, if your family faithfully brought you to church, and if you've continued to faithfully go to church, you can probably recite it by heart. There might have been a little bit of experimentation with folk masses and youth Sundays, but most Sundays were straight up page 5 or 15. And in the church, male and female roles and distinctions were very clear. Men of the congregation led in the voters' assembly. Missouri Synod doesn't even have female suffrage allowed until 1969, and many places did not have it for far longer, and even to this day. All male elders, all male board and council members, ushers, etc. And also, broadly speaking, across American Lutheranism, there was 0 female pastors when you were born in 1960. And all the acolytes were boys. And, the other denominations around you, it wasn't, a sea awash of non-denominationalism and nuns and lots of Pentecostal groups, but kind of your old classic denominations, Roman Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, etc. And things seem to be going rather well. And so, that's going to shape your perspective of what is normal in the church and how you view reality. So let's dive forward to 1980. So we're past the revolutionary 1960s and the filtering down of those changes into the general public in the 70s. And you're past the battle of the Bible in the Missouri Synod. So if you were born in 1980, you were born in what, 78? Is that right?
77.
77. And I was born in 81. So this is talking about us. So Lutherans are still about 4% of the American population, and the Synod has only dipped a little bit to 2.6 million. But the Synod is now declining since the early 70s, and it's aging. The schools, the confirmation classes, the youth programs are not what they used to be, but they are still in existence. You have functional youth groups. You have confirmation classes that are not just 1s and 2s, but are much bigger. Most LCMS-raised folks from this era, were raised with, pretty standard Lutheran worship, though the liturgical chaos heated up throughout our youths. And now the nuns rise, people who don't have any religious affiliation, but also there's the rise of the non-denominational Christians, and the church growth movement is taking off. Also, in terms of data points as compared to just 20 years previous, the liberal Lutherans they've been ordaining women before you were born. So women's ordination is just a fact in your reality. Not in the Missouri Synod, but female suffrage is quickly becoming the norm, and the emphasis of the orders of creation are fading to kind of a rear guard, if not embarrassed, defense of only the pastoral office being only for men. So, you're kind of in a declining or intermediate phase. And then if you zoom forward to the situation in 2000, if you're born in 2000, Lutherans are now only about 2% of the American population. When you're born, the Synod is still, almost at 2.6 million, but we're going to go over the cliff during your tender and coming of age years. Now it's down to like 1.7, 1.5, something like that. So these kids are born right at the slide, really taking off. And they're not even aware of any time before the slide really picks up. And so the questions that the young sons of Missouri need to be asked, did you even have a Sunday school? Were there enough kids to have a youth group? What was confirmation instruction like? Because now it's the Wild West on all of those things. There's been there's been a total loss of common language and church culture, but that's what you were born into. That's so different than the people who came before you, especially the boomers, if you're looking at that 40-year spread. Of course, everybody knows what to say. The Lord be with you. I mean, the only debate was whether it is and with thy spirit or and also with you. I mean, that's the only debate, and you know it, and we can all chuckle about it. But many of these kids grew up in churches where nobody even said that. So, yeah, I mean, you can even hear this with phrases, with pieces of the liturgy. I know that all of us who are pastors right now, we know with huge certainty that our shut-ins who actually grew up in the Missouri Synod. It's different if you have someone who's converted, but if you have somebody who's in their 80s or 90s and you go visit them, they know the common service. Even if they haven't sung it for 40 years, they know it. I mean, the pastors who are younger, by the time they're our age or even older, you will have no idea, even if the person was born and raised in the Missouri Synod, what they know and what they don't know. So these kids were born into a totally fragmented church culture. You can especially see this with male and female roles. These kids are born into a Missouri Synod that has now decided to tolerate female elders, readers, and congregational chairpersons. You almost certainly had girl acolytes. There's almost zero distinction between men and women left in much of the modern Missouri Synod. Now these young guys, if they are training to be a pastor, they've got women in the seminary. I mean, what a radical change. Instead of a place where you are forged into a brotherhood, and it's radically different than college. Now you've got girls in the classroom, and I'm not saying that those guys don't get forged into a brotherhood, and I'm not trying to paint it black and white against them, but there is a switch. And I've heard, not just from students, but from plenty of professors as well, that it's undeniable that there is a change in atmosphere when a girl's in the classroom. And I would submit it's not for the good. So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, so that's in the church, but we don't just live in that sphere. Like,
right, absolutely.
What else?
Yeah, before we do what else, I would just want us to acknowledge, and for older generations to appreciate, because again, it's not just the boomers who I think don't get this, but a lot of Gen Xers too, frankly, which, by the way, the Zoomers and many of the millennials just consider us boomers. Like, they consider you a boomer.
Right.
They probably consider me a boomer as well. And they know that we're not in that generational cohort, but it is that we have that mindset. And I think the way to undo that mindset is to be more reflective. And frankly, to acknowledge these guys, whether they, were, we were talking about kind of pastoral candidates a little bit at the end there, but Missouri Synod, young Missouri Synod men who were born 2000 and beyond, this is them. They were born into a church in numerical free fall. They didn't just see the chaos of Seminex or the church growth movement happen, but had memories of what came before, of the stability that was before. But they were born into it. They don't have personal experience of a time before that. And they were born into a Missouri Synod that has had lots of theological confusion. And that should be sympathized with. And of course, they're going to be more radical. I don't mean radical in a leftist sense, but they are going to be more intense about changing these things and being concerned about these things because it's what they've been born into. So yeah, you wanted to move on because we don't just live in the church, but we also live in civil society, or we're born into a nation. Well, let's do the same snapshots of 1960, 80, and 2000. So generally speaking, we've got movement during that time from a high trust society, generally united on the basics, to a society in huge turmoil, due to the previously mentioned religious changes, vastly disparate and incompatible political opinions, and a huge growth of foreign populations and disparate cultures in America. And all of that has radically reshaped the country that we are now living in. So let's just use World War II as a data point. Mm-hmm. If you were born in 1960, World War II was only 15 years in the past. I know that is constant frustration between older and younger generations, that the younger generations get tired of the older generations only viewing politics and national life through the lens of the experience of World War II and kind of the post-war consensus, as people will say. Well, of course, I mean, to a certain point, I do think that the younger generation should have some sympathy and say, well, of course World War II loomed. It was a worldwide conflict. A much bigger percentage of American men went and fought or were somehow involved in the war economy in World War II than in any other conflict in our nation's history, going all the way back to the Civil War. So of course it left a big imprint and a big mark. But at the same time, I'm very sympathetic to the younger generations getting sick and tired of that being the almost exclusive lens, and sometimes the narrative of World War II almost ascending to kind of like some holy perspective through which all problems in the modern world must be viewed through, like the old what's that funny logical fallacy? You're Mr. Logic. Reductio absurdum, but like reductio Hitlerum.
Oh, Hitlerium.
I've heard that one before. Hitlerium, yeah, exactly. Which I actually even remember as a young Gen Xer growing up. Who is Saddam Hussein? The next Hitler, right? Which, of course, looking back, was ridiculous. He had no world-class economy, industry, anything like that. Certainly didn't have any plans to take over the world, even if you agree that Hitler wanted to take over the world, which I tend to not think that was true either. But I think that we see this again and again and again, and it just starts getting ridiculous. Like Putin is the next Hitler, right? Can we please analyze this in a more nuanced way? It's kind of lazy to just call any upstart, alleged baddie as the next Hitler. It's very overly reductionistic, and of course, it invites dismissiveness and mockery. That would, doing that is what elicits the "okay, boomer" references. Because it gets old and tired and lame. So again, I think that both sides should see some sympathy on this. In terms of World War II, if you were born in 1980, probably one or both of your grandfathers fought in World War II. But very different from the boomers, Vietnam was over before you were born. But the memories were still fresh. One of my uncles went and fought in Vietnam. My other uncle almost went, but because he was a farmer, he needed to stay home and farm. But I remember vividly being a kid I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I remember vividly hanging out at buddies' houses, playing basketball, and the dads would be, drinking a beer or talking after work, and they would talk about Vietnam a lot. I mean, was that true for you too? That Vietnam?
I don't remember hearing a lot about Vietnam. My uncle fought in Vietnam. My dad was a cook in the reserves, so never went. But there were references periodically. Since my uncle fought in it, he didn't really talk about it around the family.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, your mileage may vary on this, but I definitely would say that we both noticed that there were lots of TV shows in our childhood that
sure.
Vietnam came up a lot, So, but we're using the data point of World War II. So to go on with, if you were born in 2000, here's an interesting fact. If you were born in 2000, you were born further away from World War II than someone born in 1960 was from World War I.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing American history in grade school and thinking that World War I was long ago and far away. I mean, I knew it wasn't the Middle Ages, but I was always kind of into history. But I did think of it as long away. I didn't think that way about World War II. I thought about that as very recent history. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, a good data point to give a window into people who want to understand the perspective of younger generations. Somebody born in 2000 is as far away from World War II as someone who's born in 1960 to World War I. So for those who were born around 1960, how much did World War I dominate your thinking? Now, again, in some ways, this is apples to oranges because World War II was, frankly, a bigger deal for America than World War I. But I still think it's a good data point. Here's another interesting data point. If you were born in 2009, so just move it up 9 years, the distance between you and World War II is 62 years. And that's the same distance between someone born in 1960 and the Spanish-American War. I mean, I don't know anybody born in 1960 who thinks about the Spanish-American War as a big deal and not super long ago and far away. Mm-hmm. Now, again, that was a much smaller conflict. Not as many Americans were involved in it. But I bet most people born in 1960 or around that era, they think about that as long ago and far away. It's not like a super huge touch point. And that's how far away World War II is for many people growing up today. And that's a huge chasm of perspective and one that people need to, I think about. It is different. Now, I'm all about knowing about history, and there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this was an important conflict. We need to learn lessons from it. We need to know about it. Mm-hmm. That's what passing down our people's stories and experiences is all about. But we also need to acknowledge those big gaps and chasms. Also, and this is kind of for folks who are more our age, I vividly remember the Berlin Wall coming down.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that was huge. Yeah. I remember all the news, people climbing on the wall, tearing it down. That was huge. And the Soviet Union collapsing, that was the biggest deal ever. Well, if you're born in 2000, it was long gone, Berlin Wall didn't exist. It hadn't been up for 10 years. Or if you're born in 2000, you have no memory of 9/11,
Yeah.
You just don't even have a memory of it. It happened either the year you were born or before you were born, if you were born in 2002 and beyond. So, I mean, those data points, I think, really help. And that's a good place to start for people to try to understand each other's perspectives. These dates and these occurrences, what would it be like to have lived with a parent who fought in World War II? That's a wonderful thing for Zoomers or millennials to think about, what it must have been like to, be around when 9/11 happened. Mm-hmm. Now, again, just by nature, they get that information more. But on the flip side, in some ways, it's even more important because we just assume many times people know what we know and experienced what we experienced because we all start from our own perspective. And also,
that is so true. That's the baseline, as you said.
Yeah, it is. It's a baseline that helps us, be grounded, but we should be reflective about it. We should acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. And we should acknowledge that there's other baselines, and that might lead people to have different outlooks on reality. Mm-hmm. And so zooming out on the big national picture.
And maybe we'll get there, but I just want to throw it out there. Oftentimes there's a mediating voice. I'm just thinking of, growing up, my mom would say, well, you know why your dad's like that? This is what he went through. Or my dad would say of my mom, well, you know why she does that? Because this was her experience. Like, he puts it into perspective. And I do this for Lauren, and she does it for me. It seems like there needs to be some kind of voice that does that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think that we can all try to serve in that way. And I personally, I think we've talked about this before. I do think Gen X is that mediating voice. We grew up in the shadow of the boomers. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've always known that they were the bigger, more central generation in terms of, just raw numbers, influence, power, everything. And so I think that, but we understand them because, we're closer to them. So I mean, Gen X, the old saying about Gen X is a slacker generation, and, folks who sit back in the corner and don't trust institutions and just smoke their cigarettes. I mean, they're too cool for school. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. But their opportunity in this sphere or on this battlefield, I do think, is what you were just talking about, is to be that bridge and, help each side, understand the other one. Gen X is very good at critiquing. And I think that, unfortunately, it's more about critique. Gen Xers tend to be more about critiquing than building.
Yeah.
They're better at negative work than positive work. Now, in our defense, I think some of that is because the boomers didn't, failed to give us as many opportunities or space to take leadership. But at the same time, this is a place for Gen X to really shine and to say, being good critics, the necessary part of being an incisive critic is to actually observe and to look at it from other people's perspective, to care enough, even if just to critique, to care enough to understand. A good critique on someone's argument is a critique that actually takes the time to understand it and to be able to analyze it and not just blast away at it ineffectively with rhetoric.
Yeah.
And so I do think the Gen X generation can be a bridge, even though, I mean, that means we got to get off of our duffs and actually, do such things. And I think what you're saying is absolutely right. There needs to be a bridge, and all Christians should be able to do this. Like what you said, hey, you got to understand your dad because of this, and hey, you got to understand your mom because of these things. But I do think the Gen Xers are kind of uniquely positioned to do this because we're born in the middle. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to kind of tie together that national situational change between 1960 and today. We can't forget that we've gone through several phases of cultural revolutions. So we've got the 60s. We've got the politically correct late 80s and early 90s that you and I lived through during our, kind of coming of age years. Mm-hmm. And we also have the Great Awakening of 2013 to 2018. And it is easy to forget that not everybody has memory of a time before that. The boomers have a memory of an America before, the 60s revolutions kind of filtered down in the 70s, because those revolutionary ideas and the changes in society didn't really filter down until the 70s. So they have a memory of a different time. And I'm not trying to say that the 40s and 50s were some golden era, but they do have a memory of a much more stable, much more prosperous, and much more cohesive America. And that's a gift. And people who are young today, they don't have a memory of times before this. I mean, a lot of people in their 20s right now, I mean, they came of age during, if not after, the Great Awakening. Like we think of, I mean, I remember when all the tranny stuff started getting big in the news and being like, this is insane. That's been their life, their entire life, you know?
Yeah.
And that, even for me, who, you know, we're middle aged, you know, I'm 40. What am I? I'm 44. Yeah, that's just shocking, you know, to not have ever grown up in a world where transgenderism is actually acceptable and celebrated. That's insane to me, you know, and that's worth dwelling upon and thinking about for these guys and girls. That's just been their normal experience, if not having it jammed down their throat in the institutions that they are supposed to look towards as authoritative things like schools and government and whatnot. So, I mean, it's just a radical shift. America's moved in its self-understanding from an extension of Western Europe or Western Christendom to a multicultural economic zone, which prides itself on kind of abstracted and amorphous ideas of freedom, unmoored, and frankly in rejection of our history, even though maybe some of those seeds were there from the beginning, but that's a different story.
Right. But even I mean, you would find agreement on the whole, for the most part, in the Missouri Synod on the rejection of the Great Awakening and those kinds of things. But there is that economic side that there is seemingly to me like a further or a farther gulf or a deeper gulf or a wider gulf.
Yeah, I think the economic gulf and the views of, the economic situation is probably one of the sharpest ones. Absolutely. But I just want to push back a little, not push back, but kind of make a point about what you said about like the Great Awakening. Yes. Widespread in the Missouri Synod. There's been a rejection of that, especially on the tranny side of things. But I do think that there is a difference between saying we all reject this and we all grew up and lived and experienced an America where this was unthinkable.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure.
That is different. And here's kind of a silly example, but I think it's worth again just thinking about. Now, I've always thought that kind of tranny cross-dressing humor is disgusting. I've always thought it was kind of vile. I never liked it. Never thought it was funny. But in terms of understanding perspectives, I understand why older generations, when, I don't know, like Monty Python or even in old black and white movies, you have a guy kind of ridiculously dress up as a girl, right? You know what I mean? And why a lot of conservative Christians would laugh at that. Why? Because they know it's so absurd that that's the humor of it. There's no chance of this being accepted, right? You know what I mean? At least in their minds, right? And why I think a lot of people, young conservative, especially males today, are just disgusted by it. Why would you laugh at this? Well, look at the difference of experience. They've been having this rammed down their throat. So, I mean, I think that, Monty Python, you show a skit where they're being transgressive, a boomer might reflect upon how that was hilarious in their day. And I can't believe how now it's normal today, But someone from a younger generation is going to be like, this is disgusting. If they're conservative Christian, this is disgusting and vile. And how could you ever have even laughed at this, dad or grandpa, And it takes in. I mean, we should take into account the difference of the perspective.
Sure.
And what they've experienced. But yeah, on to economics. I think you're right. I think you are right that this is one of the sharpest differences, because we are in a weird situation that's kind of unique in American history, where we are now going, the inequality between generations is increasing, but it's increasing in the opposite direction as it was in the past. It used to be kind of your classic American dream where, I want my kid to be better off than I was, and I want my grandkid to be better off than him. And that by and large, in general, did happen. Again, I'm not trying to debate anecdotal facts to the contrary, but generally speaking, in terms of household wealth, Americans have gotten more prosperous for many, many, many generations, and that switched with the mid to younger boomers. That situation switched, and it got turned on its head. And so the mid-wave boomers and the younger boomers are really the first sub-cohort that their household wealth is less than those who came before them on average. And of course, it's much worse for the Gen X cohort or sub-cohorts within that, and even worse for millennials and Zoomers. So the Zoomers really haven't gotten old enough to see how it'll pan out, but the predictions are not good. The charts and the lines on the graph are not looking good. And that is something that not only is just a fact, and a huge struggle for young people, but also I really think that a lot of older generations do not understand that the economic world that they grew up in no longer exists. I know it's cliche at this point, but a lot of older generations' advice will sometimes just be summarized by saying, well, hey, I just went out and worked hard and it worked out. So if you work hard, you show up, you do what you're supposed to do, and you're going to be fine. Now, a lot of particular pieces of that advice are true. You should
and
work
good
hard.
Pieces of advice to work hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you should work hard. You should show up. You should grind. I mean, those are all good things. And frankly, the work ethic that was passed down from the silent generation and the greatest generation to the boomers is frankly rather impressive, And the younger generations should learn from their elders on this. They're not saying anything that hasn't been said every single era of every single place, in human history and time and place. But at the same time, saying those true things without recognizing the shift in the situation not only comes across as uninformed and unreflective, but it can also lead to fury, frankly, and unfortunately, dismissiveness on the good parts of the message. Mm-hmm. And this is where I do think that while, some of the members of the younger generations don't have the best work ethic and don't want to grind like they should, and are softer in many ways than previous generations in terms of this. Number one, who failed to teach them? That's right. Always the thing I bring up. You hear about people saying, kids these days, they don't know how to change their oil. They don't know how to sew. They don't know how to do this. They don't know how to do that. How in the world can you not know how to do that? Yeah, well, who didn't teach them? Have you thought about the potential answers of this? It might not reflect so well on you. And this is what I mean about the unreflectiveness of older generations, especially right now. The answers to those questions might not be very flattering, and maybe you need to think about that. Mm-hmm. I remember on my ELCA vicarage, I was in a Bible study, and at that time it was with mostly greatest generation people, maybe a few older boomers, and they were griping about the boomers. And I'll admit I was doing a little griping as well. But one very wise old man, I can't remember his name, unfortunately. I'm sure he has passed away. But he said, and he just silenced everybody. It was wonderful. He was like, well, we might complain about the boomers, but who raised them? And it was just like all the wind went out of the griping. It was just gone. And that's what every generation needs to do when they start griping about the younger generations. Who failed to pass it down? It's kind of like it's kind of like parents complaining about their kids. My kids won't listen to me. Well, why is that? Maybe you didn't train them. Maybe you didn't say no, But yeah, the economic situation is where this really hits hard.
Yeah.
And I've got an extended quote, if you don't mind. It's from a article called Post-Boomer Conservatism by Declan Leary. And it was this article appeared in Chronicles magazine in February of 2025. I actually got the issue in the mail right before I left for this presentation. I was like, this is gold. I got to put it in. The only two periodicals that I subscribe to in terms of politics are Chronicles, which I think has kind of declined over the last few years because Thomas Fleming is no longer at the helm. So I don't think they're as great as they used to be. But this issue was really good. And then, of course, the Fleming Foundation, which is only online, but I'd really encourage anybody and everybody to check that out. So thus endeth the commercial. But anyway, he had a great, this Declan Leary, had a great article, and the economic section just summarizes everything I think that needs to be said. So I'll quote from him. For many, but not all of the boomers, raising a family at a middle-class standard of living with a single ordinary income was still possible. End quote. Just for a second. I mean, that's something that I do think the older generations have to reflect upon. Like, that's not really very possible in today's world for most people. Either you have to get a very good job, or you have to be willing to live way below kind of middle-class norms in terms of going out to eat and vacationing and all that kind of stuff. Like, very few people can live a middle or upper middle class life on one salary without making big sacrifices. That's just a reality. To continue the quote, American Compass's Cass, that's the name of a guy, has best framed the young right's grievance on this subject with what he calls the cost of thriving index, hereafter referred to as the Coty Index. Continuing the quote, the Coty measures the amount of labor it would take an ordinary worker to cover the food, housing, healthcare, transportation, and higher education costs of his middle-class family of four in a given year. So I want to break from the quote for a second. I just want to make clear, this is not talking about luxury. This is talking about basic family living in America. You have to have food. You have to have housing. You have to have healthcare. You have to transport yourself to and from work. And if you're going to succeed in this economy, as we'll talk about later, you probably need higher education. Now, I thank the Lord that there's also opportunities through the trades and other things like that. But again, higher education is something that if you don't have, you are literally out of luck for a huge portion of jobs. So this is not luxury. So this is totally opposed to kind of the boomer idea of, I could do it because I worked hard, and if you just work hard like me, it's going to be okay. And then the kind of adjacent accusation that the reason why young people aren't succeeding is because you spend too much on cell phones, avocado toast, which was more of a thing against the millennials. I don't think anybody says that anymore, but on luxuries. And what this Coty Index does is take those things away. Okay, it is as if they were saying, okay, older generations, let's put the luxuries out of the equation. Let's see if what you say is actually true. Now, wasting your money on luxuries is foolish. And of course, younger generations could do better on that. But let's see if the basic advice is actually true. You work hard like I did, and it'll work out fine. So to continue the quote, in 1985, when the boomers were between 21 and 40, paying for these baseline expenses, it took 39.7 weeks of work at the median income. This meant that the income from roughly 20% of the year was left to cover other expenses and save. So could you do this back in the day? Yes, you could. Okay, so to continue the quote with the comparison to today. For the median American man to cover his family's costs in those same 5 buckets, that's that Cody index, in 2022 would have taken 62 weeks of labor. And as Leary says, the year has not grown 10 weeks longer since the golden age of the boomers. The conduct of the mass economy has simply been unlinked from the experience of the common man, both as a worker and as a consumer. Even accounting for the challenges of yesteryear, such as the astronomical interest rates of the 1980s. The typical American today has a drastically higher debt burden and greater obstacles to property ownership than any his father or grandfather might have faced. In 1983, when the elder boomers were at their prime and the youngest were just entering the adult labor force, 68% of jobs required only a high school diploma. By 2021, that number had been slashed by more than half to just 31%. And he concludes this quote by saying, "That is not altogether the boomers' fault, but it is an unacknowledged chasm that separates their experience of American life from that of the generations that have followed." And end quote. And that, I think, is something that is often not understood and not acknowledged, that the boomers especially, and to a lesser degree, Gen Xers, entered the workforce in a much better economy than today's generations, the millennials and the Zoomers. And the advice of just work hard and do what I did does not take into account, like Leary says, this chasm that the situation has changed. Mm-hmm. I know we don't have time to talk about why it's changed. There's lots of reasons. But boy, if you want to not try and understand the gripes of the younger generations, especially men who are to protect and provide for their families, this is the way to do it. And it probably is, as you say, the sorest spot. Just do what I did. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. That does not work when situations have changed. There's not 62 weeks in a year, you know? So yeah. My point is we need to acknowledge this, that even if younger generations cut out all the luxuries, that doesn't change the Cody index, which is a very good apples to apples metric. And that's probably also, not to excuse them, but it's one of the reasons why many of the younger generations will say, well, I can't get out of this debt. I can't make it, so I might as well have a little bit of fun in this economic misery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's eye-opening.
It's very sobering. I mean, how can you not sympathize with young guys today facing that just brute reality? Mm-hmm. Now, again, that doesn't excuse not working hard, not showing up, not grinding. But I mean, that's just a chasm of difference. And it needs to be acknowledged. While we're on quotes, I think that G.K. Chesterton has a great quote about how we view the economy. It's from an essay of his, "The Stone That is Wearing Away the Saw." I mean, obviously, if you're sawing something, you want to saw the thing, not have the saw worn away.
Yeah.
And he definitely had a way with words. And he said, instead of testing the passing institutions by the eternal institutions, we are nibbling away the eternal institutions and leaving ourselves with no test at all. If you apply that to the way that Americans have changed, or the economy has been changed from the days of or as Leary said, the golden days of the boomers to today, I think a lot of the sentiment today can be summarized by these questions. What good is a high GDP if people can't form families in this economy successfully, on average? What good are cheap goods if you can't hand down a land and a nation to your posterity? What good is cheap labor if that means your sons can't actually form families? And so it gets back to the debate that has, been raging all across the conservative, political spectrum about, is America an economic zone, or is it actually a distinct nation? And are we going to actually hand down what we have been given to our heirs? That obviously is a way bigger discussion than we're in, but I do think these are not just valid questions. They point at something that is often unacknowledged by previous generations, and it shows the huge disparity of experience on the economic front, which leads to huge antagonism and bitterness, and frankly, even despair in the younger generations on this economic front. It's really sad, and this stuff needs to be acknowledged and frankly, dealt with. I mean, I'm not in charge of the Federal Reserve or economic policy in the United States, but the first step for the church as a whole to help these young guys is to acknowledge that they're facing a very grave economic situation that makes it very, very hard to form families. And so what can we do to help them? Well, we're not going to think about the help if we don't think that they need help.
Right. This is something that I think even Warren Buffett touches on in an essay on, he imagines two islands. One is called Thriftville and the other is called Squanderville. And he's talking about the trade deficit and how it's selling the nation out from under us. So it's giving us cheap goods, but we have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
And he just plays out those two islands, Thriftville versus Squanderville, and where that leaves us. And so what good is, basically he's saying, what good is all these things if basically we've sold everything just to have cheap things?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's why the young right is frankly correct when they look at all the debt that's been accumulated. They weren't there to vote for it. They weren't there to object to it. And now they're burdened with it, whether it be for social welfare programs or whether it be for foreign wars, whether it be for importing cheap labor. It's like eating your seed corn. All that prosperity was not faithfully handed down. Now, again, a lot of those decisions happened and were implemented by generations not of the boomer variety. It was earlier than that. So it's not like it's just them to blame.
Right.
But they, I think, many times don't acknowledge the shift in not just experience, but situation.
Yeah.
And that has to be done. Just has to be.
Yeah. I think that would just go a long way if there was just some acknowledgement that it's different.
Yeah. I mean, the sons of Missouri are literally their sons and grandsons. I mean, what do children want? They want to be loved, and to use the old cliche by James Dobson, who I don't like. Well, I guess he's dead now, right? Didn't he die? So. No. Anyway, I wasn't ever really impressed with him, but I'll always be thankful for his statement that a child spells love, time, because it's true. A child wants love, and in large part that means attention, and someone actually caring enough not just to spend time with them, but to understand them, to listen to them, to sympathize with what they're going through. And that's what needs to happen today with the Sons of Missouri as a starting point before action can be actually effectively done. Whether it be a acknowledgement of the change of religious or political situation, or as we're talking about, economic situation.
Yeah. So we've discussed the landscape of the church, the landscape of society, both economically and culturally. What about the family? To kind of wrap up this part, laying the groundwork.
Yeah, sure. So of course the family is the building block of society, and it's the most fundamental estate. And so here we see huge shifts, and we could talk about this for hours and hours and days. But I think it's helpful not just to speak in generalities, but to use data points, because data points are sharper or more specific, and they force us to be more uncomfortable and realize how, the world that we grew up in no longer exists, and to think about the perspective of others. So I'll use the same schema. Let's look at some little data points if you were born in 1960, and we'll use the same data points as we go through. So if you were born in 1960, an interesting data point is out of wedlock births. There are very few, very, very, very few out of wedlock births. Imagine telling that to somebody today. It's just a totally different world. No fault divorce is another great data point. It didn't exist in 1960. Yeah. Good old St. Reagan actually was the one who instituted it out in California. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't hate Ronald Reagan with a vengeance like many young conservatives do today. I've got a nuanced view on him, but there are definitely some negative points. I certainly don't see him as the unmitigated conservative hero that many boomers do.
Right.
I mean, he brought no fault divorce to California, and then it spread to the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. Also, if you were born in 1960, concerning your home life, again, generalizations here. Your mother was probably raising you during your younger years at home, if not a full-time homemaker, your entire childhood. Also, in terms of boys and girls, boys were boys and girls were girls. And very importantly, each had their own separate time and spaces to develop on their own. As another just very specific data point, no Title IX. Title IX didn't exist. How many sports programs were destroyed all across America at so many different levels because of Title IX? I mean, it was really, really damaging to a lot of male sports. In 1960, here's another great data point, which is just unthinkable today. Every state had anti-sodomy laws on the books, and those good old PSA, public service announcements, were regularly shown in high schools to warn people about predatory homosexuals. Mm-hmm. You knew that your kids, the boomers, went off to school, and they would be shown PSA announcements, public service announcements about watch out for predatory homosexuals. Watch out for this. I mean, that is just, the past is a foreign country, right?
Yeah, and that is.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be so unthinkable for us, but, whereas we grew up in a culture that was by and large opposed to homosexual stuff. But I mean, for kids growing up today, it's just like a foreign country. almost like an imaginary place that really has no bearing on their present existence. And so, it is much easier if you came of age in the 1960s or even the 70s to have a view of America that is anchored back then, and that doesn't reflect reality anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there was no internet. That's been talked about a lot, and the change of social behaviors and friendship making and all that kind of stuff. So no internet. And another blight on our society in terms of pornography. So what pornographic material was available to someone born in 1960? Okay, there's smutty magazines and maybe sneaking into movies, but nothing like today. Nothing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, something which has been discussed quite a bit in terms of overall health of people and also couples getting together and being attracted to each other. The 18 to 25 rate of being overweight and obese in the late 70s, when someone who was born in 1960 was starting to think about family formation, it was only about 24%. So America was still fit. Okay, let's go on to 1980. So there's some change here, obviously, but we haven't gone down the rabbit hole quite yet. So in 1980, you've got the classic phrase of the latchkey kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
For many Gen Xers, after a certain age, your mom probably wasn't home to let you in.
Yep.
And that was a big, significant development that a lot of people at the time were very, very concerned about. And a lot of people talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
This probably is why, Gen Xers typically are very independent in terms of being able to just figure out stuff, and because they had to, it was before the helicopter parent phenomenon. And in terms of boys and girls, boys were still boys for the most part, and girls were still girls for the most part. And I think it's fair to say in our childhoods, correct me if I'm wrong, each had their own separate time and spaces to develop on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time you came of age, I would submit, the edges were being nibbled away. I remember that famous incident with the Citadel. It was forced to accept women. And so the destruction of some of the few remaining all-male schools was that was in full swing. And also, I remember, not in my neighborhood, but not too far away, some little leagues were starting to let girls in, which
Mm-hmm.
just like with the seminary, it totally changes the atmosphere. Title IX, that was just a fact of our reality. That was the law of the land. And of course, all of this stuff quickly got worse with the politically correct stuff in the late 80s and 90s. Homosexual behavior, it was still frowned upon, and obviously was the butt of many jokes in our youth. But I definitely remember the normalization campaign was in full swing by the late 90s
Mm-hmm.
in pop culture. I mean, you've got Will and Grace, that was totally part of the normalization campaign.
My Two Dads.
I don't even remember that.
Yeah. Wow.
When was that? Was that late 90s?
Yeah.
Was it? Oh, okay.
I mean, they weren't, it was like two brothers, but
Gotcha.
yeah, but
Yeah,
it was still kind of like a normalization of that sort of thing, or the Ellen DeGeneres show that was probably early 2000s.
That was a big thing. Even the old Seinfeld joke about not that there's anything wrong
with that.
Yeah. I mean, that even though it was obvious, they were saying the characters were saying, I'm not that way, but not that there's anything wrong with it. Even making a joke about something actually is part of the normalization campaign.
Yeah.
Or like NYPD Blue, the hard Scrabble, cop. I don't even remember his name. The short bald guy with dark hair.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember him? Anyway, there was a whole arc that I was only vaguely aware of from like commercials that he came around and, well, you're okay even though you're gay, to somebody on the show. there's a lot. I mean, that normalization campaign was in full swing. And of course, you've got Bill Clinton's policy, don't ask, don't tell.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge revolution. The military has been used and abused for social experimentation and engineering for decades. And that was definitely what was happening then. Pornography, things didn't really change yet. You've got smutty magazines still, and again, maybe sneaking into movies. But tightly related to that, Gen Xers experienced youth without internet and cell phones.
Yeah.
But the obesity rate shot up from under 15%, to 30%. So this isn't just overweight. This is only focusing on the obesity rate. I remember that. I remember that being a huge shift in the 90s because it happened in the 90s. And I find it interesting that a lot of people today who are younger, they just don't know a time when Americans weren't very overweight. I remember that time. I remember that in the early 90s and in the 80s. It was different. And then things really changed. And again, the reason why I bring this up, because I know you're concerned about fat shaming. Okay, maybe you aren't. Because you're all fit now, right? You're still in shape, aren't you?
I am.
Good for you. I'm trying to.
I am at my high school weight.
Oh, so. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Good for you. That's great. Yeah, I'm not at my high school weight, but I'm trying to get back to close to it. But I'm not bringing it up just to bring it up. I'm bringing it up because this definitely harms the attraction between young men and young women, and thus family formation, which has huge implications for society. Mm-hmm. So let's move to 2000. This is where I really think we've got to sympathize and just really take to heart these data points for these young men and young women. If you were born in 2000, you were probably in some sort of daycare for as long as you remember. Mm-hmm. That is a totally night and day difference between the millennials and Zoomers and the boomers. I mean, incredible revolution of how we care for our children. And to think that doesn't have an effect, which I, of course, think is negative, to not think that has a huge effect is just ludicrous. Mm-hmm. And for many people, it was normal for your mom to go back to work after 6 weeks from your birth. I mean, there's never been a society in the history of the human race that's done this before recent decades. And thinking that, separating a baby, a month and a half year old from their mother for long periods of time, day in and day out, is a healthy thing. Like our ancestors would think that we are literally insane. And to not be sympathetic for people who were raised like this, I think is just beyond the pale. It's just crazy. Also, young people, if they were born in 2000, they literally never knew a time without the internet, and smartphones were available by the time they were a teen. And then, of course, this is why I kept bringing up pornography beforehand. This is where the shift is incredible. Because now, as we all know and lament, the most despicable acts and images, beyond imagination, are available 24/7 by just a few clicks of the internet. And that has greatly damaged younger generations. And of course, people who are engaging this from older generations, it's damaging them. Yeah. And I'm not trying to compare which is more sinful, but in terms of the effect on the person, the younger you see these things, the worse it is for your development.
Yeah. I mean, it affects the baseline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it normalizes all this deviant behavior, Also, kids born in 2000 have never known a time that the obesity rate was under 30%, and now it's over 40%. And again, why is that important? Because it affects family formation. Mm-hmm. So right now, if you are 18 to 25, most, meaning 56% of your peers are overweight or obese. The years before you were born, the year before you were born, if you were born in 2000. So in 1999, Clinton had brought to the federal government Pride Month. So, I mean, again, the boomers grew up with public service announcements against homosexuality. These young men and young women had Pride Month. And you literally have no memory of America having sodomy laws because that was struck down by the Supreme Court in Lawrence versus Texas in 2003. Mm-hmm. And by the time you came of age, if you're 15, being born in 2000, gay marriage was literally enshrined into federal law by Obergefell in 2015. Mm-hmm. That's the world you came of age in. And so here's another point where I think it's very sharp. You really, and I think rightly, wanted to emphasize the economic anger, or the anger over the economic situation between the boomers and the younger generations. I think this is another one which, frankly, is just as sharp and just as hurtful on both sides, because viewing their childhood and what was normal, no wonder that a lot of young conservative Americans and Missouri Synod members, they do not view America in the same way that especially the boomers do, because they view America as part, if not like the main driver of what is called today globo homo. The push to have acceptance of homosexuality, transgenderism, all this kind of stuff, which of course, as was, recently revealed, was indeed being pushed by USAID and all these NGOs being funded by the federal government. So, I mean, it can be very shocking for older generations to be like, to hear younger generations be like, yeah, America is pushing globo homo everywhere. It's part of the problem. Whereas a lot of the older generations, their default, their baseline is America has fought for freedom around the globe. It's the greatest nation in the world. Sure, we're going through our troubles, but it's fundamentally sound. And that's not where the younger generation is. And I can't blame them for, in view of their experiences. Now, should there be a little bit more nuance on it? Maybe so. That's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about understanding the different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I've got so many graphs and charts and data that I presented out in Wyoming that, obviously this is not a visual medium, but, just one anecdotal thing. If you look at, a map of the United States and the number of pediatric gender clinics, which is a fancy term for, where they will do tranny surgeries. Or what are those things called again? I don't even remember.
Is it gender reassignment?
Yeah. Gender reassignment surgeries. The number of places that would do this on children in 2007, there's two. There's one up in, Yankeedom up in Massachusetts, and there was one in Virginia. I assume near DC or something like that. But you look at a map of 2022, and there's just dots littered all over the map. You can't even count it. It's crazy. Dozens and dozens and dozens. I mean, that's the world these guys and girls came of age in. So, yeah, I mean, their home life and their normal day-to-day experience is just wildly different because of the internet. It's just very, very different. And there is a chasm, kind of like, when, Lazarus goes to heaven and Dives goes to hell. And, nope, you can't come here. There's a chasm in between us. Well, the chasm between heaven and hell may be insurmountable, and rightly so, according to our Lord's good judgment. But the chasm between generations, while may never be totally bridged in terms of the same understanding, ought to be attempted to be bridged and to be looked at for the sake of, our common faith, let alone reaching out to those outside of the church. I mean, this is just, I guess what I'm saying is basic stuff that we should just have a basic understanding that we should want to know where people are coming from, what they've experienced, so that we can love them as God would want us to love them, and so that we could help them with the care and attention to where they are at as we should. And that is sorely lacking in a lot of places. But it's never too late to get better at these things. And that's why laying out these generational trends and situations, I think, is part of the job of every pastor, especially because you're dealing with lots of different generations, and also just part of our common Christian duty, so that we can pass on the inheritance, not just materially that we have, but as the church pass on the inheritance that we have of the gospel to those who are in a different situation.
Yeah. I mean, it calls for some humility, right? And I don't always like this word, but empathy, right? Just in terms of empathy as trying to understand where someone is coming from. Like, you don't have to feel all the feels, but trying to have some way to wrap your head around what is their perspective.
Well, you are always known for being pathologically empathetic.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Always giving out hugs.
That is not my strong suit. Definitely not. So in summary, right, begin to put some of that spade work in, right, to build those bridges. Where do you want to take us next in the next time that we talk? Just as a teaser.
Yeah. Sure. I think that where we should go next is to zoom to the current situation, because if we are going to be sensitive to the perspectives of people born in the schema we've been using in 1960, 1980, and 2000, then it would behoove us to then zoom and focus in on what is going on right now. And to be sensitive to our current situation, knowing that people of different generational cohorts are looking at the present situation in different ways and have experienced different things and are struggling with different things. But what is going on right now? It may be cliche, but you can't know where you should go unless you know where you've been and you know where you are. And so we've kind of looked at differing perspectives as regulated by different generational experiences and perspectives. I would say the next place to go would be, what are some current trends right now? And the two trends that I would want to bring up would be when you have revolutions, you also have inevitable snapbacks or reactions. And I do believe we're living through one. How far it will go and how much of it will come to fruition, I don't know. But I think we need to look at that. And then also, we need to be very sensitive to the fact that within the response to the cultural revolutions that have happened in America over the previous generations, and especially more recently with the Great Awakening, we need to be sensitive to the fact that the reactions, even among the youngest generational cohort, is not uniform. And there is a huge bifurcation between men and women, which really plays into the reason why family formation is down. It's not the only aspect to be discussed, but it's a big part of it. And that should lead us to that understanding of the gap between young men and young women on multiple fronts should help us to be competent to help them form families, to give them good advice. But you said, I think very well, we should do good spade work. And I think that if anybody cares about good relations between the generations and cares about their grandfather and grandmother and their parents, and or on the flip side, their sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters, then yeah, that spade work really is try to understand the other perspective. That does not mean that you agree with it all.
Correct.
Everybody has room not only for improvement, but for correction. And I hope that the older generations, especially the boomer generation, does not think that what I'm saying is it's all the boomers' fault and you guys are, that you know nothing and you have nothing to offer. It couldn't be any further from the truth. We all need to learn from each other. And the first part of that is to actually listen to each other. Yeah. And so younger generations typically already have listened a lot, but they can always listen more and start making better distinctions between perhaps outdated advice and advice that stings but is actually really good. And young and older generations should TIME. They should love their descendants enough to really listen and to try to understand and hold back that knee-jerk criticism until they do understand and can really sympathize with where people are coming from. And only then, I mean, that's the first hard work before you can actually start working on it together instead of in opposition.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point to take away, is that understanding doesn't necessitate agreement. And too often we equate the two, and that hardens our positions completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, we see this all through the Bible.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So thanks for your time. I'm looking forward to our next time together, where we begin looking at where we are now and then, what may or may not lie ahead.
Yeah. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.